So we're here today to do a comparison between the 2020 Can-Am Maverick Sport XRC and the 2020 Polaris RZR XP 1000 Trails and Rock Edition that you see right behind us. We've done individual tests with both machines, and today we're going to actually have the two here together. We're at the Anthracite Outdoor Adventure Area in Coal Township, Pennsylvania. We're going to be run them on the same trails. We'll swap drivers between the two machines and get their opinions as well too. We're going to be focusing on both trail riding and rock crawling because, you know, honestly, the people in the market for these two machines are going to be doing a little bit of both of those. So what I can tell you, a little spoiler, between both machines, here on the East Coast, they're both great machines. They honestly are, and either one of them will satisfy you, but we're going to try and pick the best for the trails, best for the rocks, and we'll give you our honest opinion. You can see a full review of each one of these machines at utvoffroadmag.com. We have a digital e-zine that you guys can download for free. And as I said, we've tested both machines individually already, and today's just a comparison video between both. How's it going, everybody? So we got back from finishing our shootout yesterday between the 2020 Can-Am Maverick Sport XRC and the 2020 Polaris RZR XP 1000 Trails and Rock Edition. We got back a little late last night and didn't get an opportunity to do a follow-up. So bright and early this morning we're up, Have both machines here. You can see that we haven't cleaned anything up yet. And a couple of talking points that I want to go over, a nice comparison between the two. So one of the things that I want to say before we even get into any of the details of this is I was beyond impressed by both machines. You know, I figured they would both rock crawl pretty well. What I didn't anticipate is that they would rock crawl so well. Both of them rock crawl so well, number one. And number two, that they'd be so close basically in performance and on paper as well too. So we'll talk about a number of those different things and a number of those different numbers, break them down. And then I'll give you some opinions on, you know, what I'm thinking either way about each one of them. So let's check out some more details. So both machines are in the 1000 cc category. On the Can-Am side, they are using, and I have some notes here so I don't forget everything. But on the Can-Am, they have a 976 cc Rotax. So Can-Am uses all Rotax power plants in all of their machines across both ATV and side-by-side categories. So 976 cc, that actually checks in at just at 100 horsepower. And on the Polaris end, they are using their ProStar, instead of a V-twin like the Can-Am, the ProStar is a parallel twin, and that actually outputs 110 horsepower. So they're pretty close. They're both fuel injected. They're both 4 strokes, obviously liquid cooled. But the Polaris has about 10 horsepower more than the Can-Am does. As I mentioned, both machines have electronic fuel injection. The Can-Am actually uses something they call ITC, which is intelligent throttle control. And you can actually switch between either sport or eco mode in the Can-Am, and there's actually a significant difference. We found out that when you are trail riding, sport mode is a lot more fun and a lot more responsive. When you are rock crawling, it's a little bit better if you put it in economy mode it adjusts the fuel map. So it's kind of like, I have a Tundra that has tow haul mode, and when you put that into tow haul mode, it feels like it has a lot more power, but it's because you only have to push the gas pedal down a little bit for that same amount of power. So it's not like it gains horsepower. And that's kind of sort of, in my opinion, how the Can-Am works. The Polaris just sort of manages it, so there's no setting in between, or no in-between setting for the Polaris. Transmission-wise, both machines use a belt-driven CVT, continuously variable transmission, right? So there's no gears per se. Instead, it's 2 pulleys and you know, a drive pulley and a driven pulley, and one contracts and the other expands, and that's basically how it gives you your gear ratios. They're pretty reliable. So both manufacturers, Can-Am and Polaris, have both added a significant amount of cooling to their CVT systems. So if you look on the CVT belt housing, you can actually see ventilation, you know, ventilation tubing that goes in. So they bring cool air in, they expel hot air, and the reason they do that is because heat is deadly to a CVT belt. So as soon as you get it hot, you're going to wreck the belt. And rock crawling, where you're very delicate on the throttle, if you're not careful, you can slip that belt, and that's where you have damage. I can honestly tell you, with the amount of rock crawling that we've done with both of these, we haven't had an issue. Now, we have experienced, myself and the 2 other riders that I had crawling with me, 2 other drivers, I should say, they both have experience with, you're either on the throttle or you're off the throttle. There's no kind of feathering it. You're better off to spin the tires or just let it sit there and idle. You don't want to let that belt slip, and that's where you'll get heat. When you get heat, it damages the belt. When it damages the belt, then you're going to have to switch the belt. So in any case, the Polaris system has a park in gear, or it's a park in gear. Yeah, it's parking gear. So they don't have parking brakes, neither one of them do. So they have park, they have reverse, they have neutral, they have high and low. When you're trail riding, you run it in high. When you're rock crawling, you run it in low, because both of these machines are geared significantly lower. I will tell you that, in my opinion, I felt the Polaris was geared much lower, even than the Can-Am, which is geared lower than like a normal Maverick Sport. I felt the Polaris was a little bit lower and actually a little bit easier to crawl. So you know, really, really good machines. The Polaris utilizes for their four-wheel drive extreme performance, true on demand, close ratio. So they manage the four-wheel drive interaction all electronically. It feels the rear wheel slip and engages the front wheels when it needs traction. And then it will also do that with the differential in the front too. So Polaris sort of manages it on its own. The Can-Am system's a little bit different. They're using the QRS CVT, which is quick response system. And it actually also has smart lock. So on the Can-Am, you have it in two-wheel drive, you can put it in four-wheel drive, and then you can actually lock the front differential, or if you have it in four-wheel drive, the smart lock, which is the front differential, will either be in trail or rock mode. In trail mode, it keeps the differential a little bit less sensitive, so when you want to go around corners, you're able to very easily corner. In rock mode, it triggers that front differential a little quicker, so when it feels that wheel slip, it'll lock the other wheel in. And what is really nice on the Can-Am, I had the front differential locked, and you don't realize how difficult it is to turn with a locked front differential until you try and actually do it. And then I remembered, oh, this has the smart lock technology, so I took it out of differential lock and left it in rock mode and just let Can-Am, that system manage itself, and it's super, super impressive. So when it comes to suspension, Polaris and Can-Am chose to do it a little bit differently. Let's start with the Can-Am first. So Can-Am uses dual A-arms in the front, they use dual A-arms in the rear. Up front, they get 14.75 inches of travel. In the rear, they get 14.75 inches of travel. So totally similar on both ends. On the Can-Am, they're using Fox Podium 2.5s. They're the 2.5s with the QRS 3 system, the QS3 system. And what that is, it's their suspension adjustment system. So it's 3 clicks, soft, medium, hard. So it makes it really simple if you're not a shock tuner and you're like, I'd like it to be a little more plush, then you can crank it back. If you're in a section where you're going to be going a little faster and you want to make it a little bit more robust, you can crank that up to 2 or 3 and it works really well. It does not have any rebound adjustment on the front or the rear. On the Polaris side, they're utilizing Walker Evans shocks, and they're the needle shocks, so they have 16 positions. So instead of like on the Fox side where you have 3, 1, 2, 3, you actually have 16 on the Polaris. You may find that better, you may find that worse. It kind of depends what you're looking for. So it definitely gives you more adjustability, but it's a little bit more complicated to get it dialed. Again, it depends what you're looking for. On the Polaris side up front, they have 16 inches of travel. So it actually has 1.25 inches more travel up front than the Can-Am. And on the rear, there is 18 inches of travel. So, you know, significantly more there. About 3.25 inches more travel in the rear than the front. How they're doing that is because unlike the Can-Am that uses dual A-arms in the rear, on the Polaris, they're using a trailing arm with a high clearance radius rod on it, so locating arms that allow the suspension arms to go up and down. You definitely get more ground clearance. What I will tell you, you definitely get more suspension travel. What I will tell you is that the ground clearance suffers a little bit. So the Can-Am actually has a 1/2 inch higher ground clearance at 15 inches, whereas the Polaris has 14.5 inches. And honestly, the lowest spot on the Polaris that I can see is those trailing arms. So you're gonna give something up to gain something. So on the wheel and tire forefront, both machines are using 30-inch tall tires. They're both mounted on 14-inch wheels. They do it a little bit differently. On the Can-Am, they're using a 30-inch Maxxis Liberty. So it's 30 inches tall by 10 inches wide on a 14-inch wheel. They're a really good all-around, all-terrain tire. They're kind of like a light truck tire, and they did excellent crawling. They did excellent in the mud. They did excellent on the trails. Standard cast aluminum wheel, so no bead lock. On the Polaris, they use an awesome bead lock wheel, so really strong, very tough cast aluminum wheel, also 14 inches. And for tires on the Polaris, they're using Pro Armor Crawler XGs, I believe they are. Yeah, they're the Crawler XG. So 30 inches tall by 10 inches wide on a 14-inch wheel. They're a really good crawler tire, so the tread compound is really soft, and they have the ability to really grab rocks, kind of like Velcro. Not as durable on the trail, in my opinion. We did get one flat on, for both machines, all 8 tires, we got one flat. It was on the Polaris. We did impact a rock, not crawling, but going pretty fast. And it did give us a really nice pinch flat that we had to put a number of plugs in to get it to seal, but it stayed sealed. So kind of is what it is. Again, it's one of those things where you're going to have to give something up to gain something. So if you want your tires to be really soft and compliant for rock crawling, they're not going to have as much puncture resistance. So let's talk MSRP. Both machines are close. I will tell you that the Polaris is a little bit more money. So the Polaris checks in at $23,599 of an MSRP. The Can-Am checks in at $21,499 for an MSRP. And again, this is MSRP, so you might be able to buy a Polaris cheaper, even though the MSRP is higher than a Can-Am. That's something you have to work out with your local dealer and try and figure that out. So dimensions is one of the most important topics that we need to talk about here. And honestly, they're an optical illusion for me. I was positive that the Polaris is larger than the Can-Am. That is incorrect. So on paper, and I have the paper right here, let's talk about the numbers. So both machines are 64 inches wide. That is undebatable. So if you are in an area of the country where it's gated and they only allow vehicles in of a certain size, they're both 64 inches. You're going to be good to go with either one of those. When it comes to overall vehicle length, and that's not necessarily measuring front of the front tire to the back of the back tire, it's where is the front of the vehicle end and where does the back of the vehicle end. And on a lot of these machines, it's the bumper. The wheels are really stretched out, but the bumper may protrude further than anything. So the Can-Am is 122 inches long, 309.8 centimeters for everybody else in the world besides the United States that uses the metric system. The Polaris is actually 120 inches long and 304.8 centimeters. So the Polaris is actually about 2 inches shorter than the Can-Am. I was completely blown away by that. I didn't think that at all. From a height perspective, they're actually both 74.25 inches tall. So exactly the same height. And we actually have an aftermarket roof on each machine. So neither one of those machines comes with a roof. So I think the Polaris, with the roof on the Polaris, it makes it just a hair taller. But stock to stock, the way you get it from the factory, they're exactly the same height. Ground clearance, we talked about that a little bit before. Can-Am has 15 inches, the Polaris has 14.5. And so just a little bit more ground clearance on the Can-Am. The dry weight, I was surprised. The Polaris felt a little heavier to me. It's actually a little bit lighter. So the Polaris checks in at 1,573 pounds. The Can-Am checks in at 1,593 pounds. Probably tires, there's a very good likelihood that the tires are weigh a little bit more, but I'm not going to take the tires off and weigh them. I don't think that's that big of a deal. As far as capacities go, the Polaris has a 9.5 gallon fuel tank. The Can-Am has a 10-gallon fuel tank. So we didn't track fuel economy. I think that's a really difficult one to track off-road. And so I didn't get into that too much. The one number that is, as far as all the numbers from Polaris to Can-Am, they're really close. The one number that I think is an outlier is towing capacity. The Can-Am has a 1,500 pound towing capacity. The Polaris doesn't have one, it's NA. So it doesn't have a hitch, it's not set up to tow, and that's not an option. So if you're in the market for one of these and you're gonna tow a trailer, that's your only option. The Can-Am is your only option. For some people, that wouldn't even matter. And I'm one of them. I'm probably not going to be towing a trailer with one of these. We'll use something else if we need to do any towing. All right, so enough of numbers. Let's talk about opinion, and this is clearly my opinion. A lot of people are afraid to have an opinion, and I'm confident enough to say that I think my opinion's accurate, but it's exactly that. It's an opinion, and it's something that that pertains to me. All right, so take it for what it's worth. Interior. If I'm comparing interior to interior, I prefer the Can-Am. I think the seats are a little bit more comfortable. Ergonomically, for me, I like the Can-Am interior a little bit better, and our riders, that passengers and drivers that have been in and out of them, they all agreed that they liked the feel, the ergonomics of the Can-Am interior a little bit better than the Polaris. The best mud protection. The Can-Am has a little bit better mud protection. Now, unfortunately, that's going to be a detriment for one of the other things that we move forward when we talk down the road. So the doors are a little taller on the Can-Am, and you have a feel of being in the car a little bit more. And because of that, it kind of helps keep the mud off of you a little bit better. Visibility. If you're rock crawling, the Polaris has better visibility. From the driver's seat, if you look out the window, you can exactly see where that front tire is placed on the Polaris. On the Can-Am, you can't. You have to lean out a little bit further. So for rock crawling, if you're looking for like how great is my visibility for rock crawling, the Polaris actually has a little bit better visibility. It's also the reason why it doesn't protect you as much from the elements. So if you're riding on a muddy trail, you're going to get muddier on the Polaris than you are on the Can-Am, but it's because the wheels are out where you can see them a little bit better. So again, you're going to have to give something up to gain something. Skid protection. This goes to the Can-Am by far. The Can-Am has UHMW, ultra high molecular weight plastic skid plates, front to rear, on everything from the belly to the A-arms, to the rock rails, the orange rock rails that you see on it. All of that is plastic. And for rock crawling, I think plastic is better. Number one, it's lighter. Number two, it actually can be deformed and go back to its original shape. And it just works better. It slides over the rocks better. The Polaris has some plastic on it. It also has metal. So the rock rails on it are not plastic. And we damaged one of those. And unfortunately, I thought, well, we'll just pull the rock rail off. We'll bend it back into shape. It's not a big deal. It was done at probably under 1 mile an hour. So not a super hard impact, but it was enough to bend the rock rail, pull the rock rail off, try and bend everything back together. We find out that the hardware is a one-time use piece of hardware. So you can take it off. Good luck trying to get it back on. So you have to buy 3 new bolts, which are around $30, to reinstall that rock rail. There are some companies out there that are producing an alternative method. Hauser Racing, I know for sure, is one of them. They have something called a J bracket or an L bracket, and it makes it a whole lot easier to put those on and off. As far as steering goes, both machines have electronic power steering, so they have EPS. I personally felt the Can-Am was a little bit tighter, a little bit more dialed. The Polaris is great. I just felt that the Can-Am was a little bit better. So on the Polaris, it works really well as well. I just found the Can-Am, for my preferences, to feel a little tighter. And honestly, on the tight trail, so I do a lot of trail riding, probably more trail riding than I do rock crawling. Even though the Can-Am has a little bit longer of a wheelbase, slightly, I felt that you could dodge the trees with it a little bit better. So you guys can take that for what it's worth. That's my opinion. The best slow speed crawler, if you're gonna buy something and you're not a trail rider, you're a rock crawler, you're gonna go out and you're gonna rock crawl, I think the Polaris is probably a better rock crawler. And I say that for a couple reasons. Number one, that I think the stock tires are stickier. It has beadlock wheels, so you can lower the pressure, and that's better for rock crawling. But the big thing was its low gear is really, really low. And the throttle response in low gear is awesome. It was really easy to modulate that throttle. The downside to crawling with it is I would change the rock rails and I would put something different on there, because you know you're going to bash those up. Another talking point to rock crawling is the ability to shift from reverse to forward or forward to reverse very quickly. And I think the Polaris does that better. So their shifter is not gated like the Can-Am. Every gear is gated. On the Polaris, park is gated, and then you have to slide it around the gate into reverse, and then you can quick shift from reverse to high or reverse to low once you get that feel down. So you're very able to do that very quickly. If you get in a rock crawling situation and you're like, I gotta back up really quickly, you can jam it in reverse in the Polaris and easily transfer from forward to reverse. You can do it in the Can-Am as well, but because of the multiple gates, I think it's a little bit quicker on the Polaris. And honestly, sometimes just being like a millisecond quicker is the difference between running out of talent and not. So the best wheels, you've heard me talk about that before, is the Polaris. Number one, they're beadlocks, and beadlocks are always better in my opinion. Unless you get a leaky one, but the factory beadlocks they're really good. They're outstanding. So it has a beadlock wheel, and I like the way that it looks better too. I think it's one of the best looking factory wheels on the planet. It has one weakness. The center caps are plastic, and you can see that we're missing the right rear one on this one. I don't even know how we lost it. We actually lost it before we went rock crawling. So we may have bumped something along the way. But definitely as far as wheels, I would go with the Polaris. If you have to tow, as I mentioned earlier, you really have only one choice, and it's the Can-Am. It does come with a factory hitch, and the Polaris does not. And you know, so could you put one on the Polaris? Could you source it and put it on? Probably, but it's one of those things that they are not recommending that you tow with it. So you have to heed the manufacturer's warning. Best lights goes to the Polaris by far. It has LED lights. It also has, I call them eyelash lights. They look like cat eyes kind of, that are LEDs that are on all the time, and they're really cool. So from an aesthetic standpoint, I really like those. Not that there's anything wrong with the lights on the Can-Am, I just think that the Polaris is better. All right, so we're down to the nitty gritty. So what is our opinion either way? And I have a couple of different opinions here. If I am going to buy a strictly rock crawler and I'm only going to crawl on it, that's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to worry about trail riding. I would probably pick the Polaris, and I would probably change the rock rails on it and be done with it. I loved its low speed crawling. I love the articulation from it. I love the beadlock wheels. I love the ability to be able to view the wheels. I like the gated shifter. All of those things make it an awesome rock crawler. On the flip side, if I were going to pick a machine that I was primarily going to trail ride with and do some rock crawling with, but primarily trail ride with, I would probably pick the Can-Am. I felt it was tighter in the woods, a little bit more responsive in the woods. I just liked the way that it handled, and I liked the comfort of it. If I'm going to go for a long distance, I think I'd rather do that in the Can-Am than the Polaris. But I have to say, both machines are so ridiculously good. You know, we're nitpicking here, so it's like trying to pick which professional athlete is better at a certain position, which quarterback is better, who's better, you know, Tom Brady or, well, Tom Brady's pretty much the best as far as quarterbacks go, so that's a terrible example. But you get what I'm saying, right? Who's better, Steph Curry or, you know, who did you say? LeBron James, yeah. Who's better, Steph Curry, LeBron James? Two totally different players. Which one's the better player? They're both awesome, right? And that's kind of how this goes as well too. So both so good, both so comfortable, both so capable. At the end of the day, you have to decide what's going to better meet your needs. If money is a thing, the Can-Am's cheaper. The Can-Am is $2,100 cheaper MSRP. So I'm not going to stand here and tell you either machine is perfect. I'm just going to tell you that they're both capable. If you're a Polaris guy, buy the Polaris. If you're a Can-Am guy, buy the Can-Am. If you're a rock crawler, you could do either one. If you're a trail rider, you could do either one. It's what you're going to dial into being the most specific to meet your needs, and that's the one you have to choose. I appreciate you guys checking out our channel. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of comments on this one, and I will answer them as honestly as I possibly can. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and do that, and we will continue. It's the only way we can continue to produce the content that we're producing. Have a great day.